but it's a pleasure to have everyone here. Just a reminder, this is Habits of the Heart, Rabbinic Perspectives on Human Temperament and Character. It's a little sad. This is the last session. We're ending a week early due to family, not quite simcha, but family happening in Rabbi Alex Israel's life. For those who are maybe just joining in or just starting in on the series, Rabbi Alex Israel is an author, educator, and international lecturer. He teaches at Yeshiva Eretz HaTzvi and Midrash Lindenbaum, and he records a daily 929 podcast, the Tanakh podcast. Born and raised in London, Rabbi Alex Israel made Aliyah in 1991 and received smicha from the Israeli chief rabbinate following several years of study at Shivat Har Etzion. Rabbi Israel holds several degrees, including from the London School of Economics and from Bar Ilan. He has published also on Sefer Malachim. If you are joining us on Zoom, it's a pleasure to have you. We always like learning with people. And if you've been enjoying this series so far, or if you want to review on materials from past classes, you can find them on our Facebook page, which I will post a link to in the chat, as well as on our YouTube channel with Facebook getting the faster recordings. And you'll also find recordings on our audio library. And if you're missing source sheets from previous classes, those are also posted in the Facebook, on the Facebook videos, in chat, and on the audio library.
So I hope people enjoyed it. I have to say that I read her whole book. She's got a book called The Power of Meaning, which I found it's a very easy read, and it's a really wonderful read. And so what we're going to talk today is indeed this search for meaning. And I think it's something which we as modern people are all, very taken by. The question, of course, is, how does a person in today's world discover meaning? I think meaning is something we're all looking for. And I will definitely say that when I have done this class with students that I have in their gap year, who are 18 years old, and I pretty much ask them, are you having trouble sort of finding your meaning, right? There's almost been unanimous response that yes, help us find our calling, help us find our meaning. So it's clearly a topic that speaks, and I imagine that as we go through life, we still need to continue to look for meaning at different moments. For example, about a year ago, my youngest child left home, and we've got 4 kids. And suddenly, from a house full of children, the house is quiet, and me and my wife, great, but it's a whole change. First of all, first it was like being engaged again, or something like that. We could go out any night that we wanted. It was fantastic, but suddenly you start asking yourself, wait, my house for the last 25 years has been based around a family, and now what's my identity? What's my meaning? How do I fill my time? What do I do? So I don't think this is only related to 18-year-olds. I think that it's related to so many of us. So I want to just maybe relate to what Emily Esfahani Smith speaks about. I found it very, very powerful. I'll just say a few words about it, and then we'll go on to our source sheet, which we'll use today, and we're going to get into some Purim Torah. I mean Purim Torah in the best sense of the word, and not the funniest Purim Torah, Purim Torah, and we're also going to try and add, but let's deal with Emily Esfahani Smith first of all. For her, there are 4 pillars of meaning. Okay, she basically says, I'll try and summarize for those who haven't seen the video, that she basically says that there are a lot of people looking for happiness, but when you chase happiness, you generally don't find that you're happy. And instead, meaning is based around 4 different things. Okay, number 1 is belonging, right? Belonging, the question is where do you belong? And in fact, in the book, she talks about a small island off America, where everybody, it's almost a bit like a kibbutz. Everybody knows each other. Everybody went to the same school. Everybody goes to the same, whatever it might be. Everybody knows each other's names. And then those people move to the mainland for university, and they're just lost, right? They don't know how to cope. Suddenly they have to deal with people who really don't know them. There's a sense of belonging, which is very, very, it gives person meaning. It gives people a framework. It gives, who do I belong to, right? And I would argue that today, in an individualistic age where everybody is encouraged to pursue their own goals, to pursue their own identity, to pursue their own independent way, one of the things which has caused a crisis of meaning is we're so individualistic, we've stopped to belong. And then how do you make friends, right? I actually have a friend of mine who's starting a new startup, and it's a startup aimed at people in their 50s who are looking for meaning and looking for belonging. And she's going to try and use all sorts of techniques to help people connect with others, to make people belong, to belong to a club, to belong to whatever it is. And Rabbi Sacks's famous always quotes the book Bowling Alone, right? That people used to go bowling in groups, but now more and more Americans are bowling alone. And I can't remember the name of the author of the book, it suddenly escaped me. But whichever way, the idea being that belonging has become something which is difficult to manage. Second dimension, second pillar, right? Says Emily Esfahani Smith, is purpose. Do I know what my purpose is? Okay. Do I have a clear sense of what I'm here for? Do I have a clear sense of purpose, or am I just sort of drifting? Right. Now, a person, of course, I think it's very important to say that a person can actually, meaning isn't just something that falls out of the sky. It's not Torah min hashamayim, right? Meaning is something you can make. So a person can actually decide to belong. A person can create frameworks of belonging, be it clubs, associations, it could be religious groups, it could be whatever. And likewise, people can discover purpose in their life. Frequently, a person could start volunteering for a particular charity. A person could start, being affiliated with a place which, I don't know, rehabilitates, whatever it might be. And suddenly you start developing a purpose. People need me, right? And one of the areas which I think gives meaning more than anything else is having a family, right? When you have a family, your children really genuinely do need you, certainly in their younger years, until they decide that they absolutely don't need you and you're a pain in the neck. But certainly when they do, that's a purpose. I'm trying to help a child become a real person in the world. So the second is purpose. The third she talks about is the idea of, transcendence. And she says that we actually do need, and somebody put in the notes just now, Viktor Frankl. And Viktor Frankl says that you always have to have something which is larger than you, right? To find meaning, you have to find something that's larger than you. Always talks about Holocaust survivors who, when they went through the camps, those who survived generally had someone to care for, something to hope for, were looking to actually achieve something, return to their career or what have you. She talks about transcendence, though. Emily Esfahani Smith grew up in a Sufi household. She talks about religion. She talks about meditation. She talks maybe about nature, maybe about just, in her book, she starts off the chapter about transcendence by talking about an experience of going out into the desert to gaze at the stars through an amazing telescope and to understand that you are but a very small individual with a huge galaxies around you, and how transcendent that is. Sometimes we feel that when we're standing at Niagara Falls or Grand Canyon or some other amazing, we just feel like, whoa, and that transcendence somehow gives us a sense of something beyond ourselves. It might be music, right? Music gives us a sense of the sublime. And then the last thing she says is storytelling. And I've got so into this storytelling business lately. I've been reading a book actually by David Brooks, the New York Times columnist David Brooks, and he's got a new book called, one second, I'm just going to open it because I'm so bad. It's called How to Know a Person, the Art of Seeing Others Deeply and Being Deeply Seen. And one of the things he talks about to see other people deeply, right, is do you know their story? He says, go up to somebody, don't talk about yourself, let them talk about them. Ask them to tell you their story, right? And we all have a story. Now, again, Emily Esfahani Smith has this lovely example of this, which expresses meaning. She says, and by the way, I think this is very true about our current moment in Israel, because she talks about, in her case, somebody who was a football player, and the football player was very successful, and he was injured in a football game, and he wasn't able to walk. And the question is, how does he look at himself? And this football player, after a little while, told his story in the following way. He said, I used to be a very selfish, wonderful sportsman, but very selfish. I only cared about myself. I only cared about, getting all the girls and being better than everybody else. And then I was injured. And when I was injured, my life started, because suddenly I became a humble person. I became a caring person. And now my life has started, because now I can really be the true me. Now that's amazing, because that person could have looked at themselves the rest of their life as a victim, as a miscan, as a pathetic cripple. Sorry to use that word, but I'm trying to use it in the negative sense. And instead, what he actually says was, this happened to me, but this was the beginning of my real life. I say this touching this moment in Israel, because we do have so many people who have been injured in the war, and some of them with unfortunately have lost limbs and what have you. And recently I was listening to a testimony of one of them, and he was like, just so upbeat. He was like, he talks about the moment when he woke up, and he says, somehow deep in my psyche, even though I woke up without legs, he said, I never thought I would see my family again. I never thought I would watch a football game again. He says, and now, he said, the first thing I said was, what's up with my favorite football team? And can I watch the game? And suddenly, he had a survivor's attitude, not a victim's attitude. And the question that Emily Esfahani Smith says, where do you belong? Can you seek out your purpose? Can you find moments of transcendence which transcend you? And can you tell your story and have an idea of your story? Now, of course, and she obviously doesn't say this in the book, but what I would argue with, both as Jews and as Israelis, we almost have this inbuilt. What I mean is, as Jews, we belong. We belong to a nation. Sometimes we prefer not to, but we do, right? We belong. And if you belong to a shul, or you belong, right? And you grow up in shul with all the crazy, craziness of what it means to be part of a community, right? When we came back to shul after not being in shul for almost a year with Corona, right? And the first thing I said to my wife after the first Shabbat in shul was, we've got a lot of wacky people in our shul, right? The guy who shushes, the person who davens too loud, the person who seems to be constantly blowing their nose. I don't know, whatever it might be. And I just realized how many characters we have in our shul, but that's what it is to be in a community. And when I think back as a child, there was that old man who used to scare me a little bit. There was the guy who every single Shabbat used to make the same wise crack at me. Oh, you've got such a nice jacket. Can I borrow it? Right? And there was the candy man, and you belong somewhere, right? It's something that we have inbuilt in a community. Purpose. Obviously, we have purpose. We have Torah mitzvot, we have chesed, we have things to do, right? Transcendence. Any religious community has, God, moments of transcendence, dancing, singing, and story. Well, we do that every Pesach. We tell our story, right? And the amazing thing about the story is that everybody's invited, all the 4 children, right? Everybody's invited. In fact, we even invited to argue about the story and to question the story. So we have that. I would argue Israelis very much have it. Israelis have a sense of belonging, very strong sense of belonging, a sense of purpose to build our country, to defend our country, to make our country prosperous, a great sense of, and that has been boosted since the 7th of October, as people have realized just how vulnerable we are after what Micha Goodman has called Israel's near-death experience, right? We have a sense of transcendence on many, many sublime days in Israel, be it Yom HaAtzmaut or Yom HaShoah, or other days which seem to be so resonant, and we are telling our story, right? Israelis are very good, again, through those Yamim Le'umiyim, those national days, of being very aware of their story, whether it's, Hatikva Bat Shnot Alpayim, or whether it's the story of from Shoah to Gvura, or whatever story you might tell, right? This is the stuff which gives people identity, which gives people meaning, which gives people place, which gives people sense of themselves. So that's a quick summary of Emily Esfahani Smith with a few additions. And I just think there's a we are living in an age which has become so individualized that we and maybe let me even say something. I'll come back to it in the when we start looking at the sources, but I'll say something else. So often, unfortunately, today, young people are so ensconced in their screens. And thank God we have school where they actually have to interact with peers and with but I remember, for me, very central was my youth group. I went to Bnei Akiva, and I absolutely admired my madrachim. For me, sometimes the older boys in school, certain of them, but sometimes it was my madrachim who were phenomenal role models to me. Of course, I didn't connect with everyone, but it was usually a male role model, somebody who I could look at myself, where I would be in another 5 years or 10 years. And I feel that's also something really important that Emily Esfahani Smith doesn't talk about, right? The idea of actually having role models, having people who can live out, and I can look at them, and I can almost try on different models. Ooh, what it would be like to be like that person, what it would be like to be like that person, and gain from other people's lived experience, from the true depth of their personality. And I think all of these things are things which help give us meaning, help give us a sense of being able to carve out our own story, our own purpose, what for us is transcendence and our sense of belonging. So that was just sort of in a way by way of introduction. I don't know if anybody on the call or on the Zoom wants to maybe add something or make a comment. Maybe I've said something which triggered a memory or a thought or a insight, because you're really welcome to. All right, so if nobody's going to jump in, I will jump into the source sheet, and I'm going to share my sources. Hold on a minute. Okay, here we go. Share screen. Here we go. So I want to begin with the story of Esther. And Esther is a fascinating character because, as many have spoken about, Esther, we're going to read about her in a short amount of time in the Megillah. Esther is somebody who starts off the Megillah very passive. We're told that Esther doesn't say. She doesn't tell her people. She doesn't. She does whatever Mordecai tells her to do. Esther is a person who maybe is not even sure of her identity. We learn about Hadassah hi Esther. She doesn't have parents. And she has two identities, a Persian one and a Jewish one. And she seems not to be willing to pass up to her Jewish identity. When she goes to the king, she doesn't go to the king. It says Vatilakach Esther. It says it twice. She is taken to the king. She is passive. She is doesn't do very much. And to that regard, even though we see her as a hero, at the beginning of the story, it's very mysterious. Who is this woman? She seems very young, inexperienced, and all that. And then, at the end of the Megillah, suddenly she's doing everything. It says that Esther commands, right? Vatomer Esther Shiva Mordechai. She's the one who commands Mordechai, Lech konoset hayudim, go gather. And she comes up with a plan, go gather the Jews. We're going to fast for 3 days. And then she goes into the king and she invites the first feast and the second feast, and she unveils Haman. And at the end of the Megillah, in fact, she's even more active because she's the one who insists that it's written down and that Purim is established as a festival. And if you take it in the Talmud says that she's the one who turned round to the Rabbinic community and said, Kidvuni l'dorot, put me into the Megillah. Kivuni l'dorot, make sure that I am fixed, that this festival becomes a holiday in the calendar, and make sure that my book is included in the Tanakh. That's quite some heavy hitting, right, on her part. She becomes a leader. She's the one who's issuing the commands, especially in a patriarchal male world of the men of the Great Assembly. Suddenly Esther becomes the personality who is calling the shots. And the question, of course, is where is the pivot? Where is the tipping point? where is the moment in which, is there one, where Esther seems to find her stride, to move from passive to active? Where is the moment where she, discovers her own self, or maybe we might say in the context of this particular shiur, her own meaning? And I would argue it's in this short passage that we see in front of us here on the screen. You've got it in English, you've got it in Hebrew. Second. Here we go. And this is what we're going to say. The scene is this. Mordechai has come to the palace. He's come in sackcloth and ashes. Sackcloth. It seems like the only thing that makes Esther agitated is that he's dressed in sackcloth. In other words, it says, she's shaking. Why is she shaking? She doesn't know about the decree yet. She's shaking because he's wearing the wrong clothes. Somebody once said, I once heard in a shiur by Dr. Yael Ziegler, she said, this is the sign of a woman who's been spending the last 5 years reading Vogue magazine, right? In other words, all she's been doing is doing beauty treatments for the last 5 years. The worst thing you can do is be inappropriately dressed, right? Still, Esther is not the Jewish heroine that we know. But at a certain point, he shows her the writ. He shows her the decree of annihilation of the Jewish people. And Esther says, listen, I'm sorry, I can't help you. I haven't been called for 30 days. I'm not your girl. I can't help you. And now Mordechai takes her to task. And it says, Vayomer Mordechai lahashiv el Esther. Mordechai sent back to give the answer to Esther. Al tedami b'nafshech limalei beit hamelech mikol hayudim. Don't imagine to yourself that you will escape in the palace out of all the Jews. Ki macharesh tacharishi beit hazot. If you are quiet at this moment, revach v'hatzala ya'amod laYehudim mimakom acher. Salvation will come to the Jews from another place. And you and your father's house will be lost, will be destroyed, will go to oblivion. And who knows? Who knows whether this is the moment that you came to your royal position? And at this point, Esther sent the reply to Mordechai, go gather the Jews who are in Shushan. Fast for me, do not eat and drink for 3 days, night or day, and my attendants will fast as you do. And when this is done, I'll go to the king against the law, and if I perish, I perish. By the way, this is really Esther's coming out moment. If you know the Megillah, there are two things which are absolute constants in Persian society, as it's reported in the Megillah. One is mishteh. There are 10 mishtaot in the Megillah. They're always drinking. They're always partying, right? And mishteh. And the second thing that they have is dat. Everything is dat. Dat means not religion, but law, right? They make law about how much you can drink. Vashtia kadat inones. They make laws about the makeup for the virgin girls who are coming to the king. Even the king cannot revoke his own laws. Esther's coming out moment is when she, number one, doesn't eat and doesn't drink. She doesn't do the mishteh. She doesn't do the party. And number two, she contravenes the law. This is when Esther un-Persians herself, right? But what she does is also Judaifies herself. But what causes her to do this? So it's very interesting. The first verse 13 says like this: do not imagine that because you're in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. What Mordechai is essentially accusing her is not, he says, you're saying you can't do it. He says, it's not that you can't do it. It's just that you can't care. You don't care. And you know why you don't care? Because you know you're safe. You think, he says, that we can all die because you're safe. It's not that you can't, it's that you can't care less. You think, he says, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, let all the Jews die because I'll be okay in the palace. That's quite a heavy accusation, quite a personal accusation. But the second thing he talks about is this: for if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance from the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your family will perish. In other words, Hashem will find a way. But what about you, Esther? Esther, you remember those days when we cried because you were taken as a virgin to the king and it was so unpleasant, it was so horrible, and you didn't want to go? Maybe now we understand why you're there. This is your moment, Esther. Are you going to rise to the moment? Right? Who knows if you've come to this royal position for times such as this? I quote my Rosh Hashiva, Rav Aaron Lichtenstein, who we quoted last time, And he used to give this sermon every single year on Tanit Esther. I'll tell you what he used to do with it. But he also says this, it's on your screen. We're all to some degree Esther. Each of us, for whatever reason, has doubts as to his or her abilities. We too are hesitant. What am I going to achieve? What? I'm going to achieve all that. I'm going to save Am Yisrael. I'm going to stop assimilation. I'm just a youngster. I can achieve only a little bit in my neighborhood, a little bit in my youth group, a little bit in my family, but to start a revolution, to determine the future of a nation, to avert an evil decree, little me. Herein lies the ultimate question. It's directed to each and every one of us. Let each person do as Esther did. Stand before himself and stand before God, and not only whether what he is doing is good and worthy, but whether it is the best and most worthy thing that he could be doing. He has to keep asking himself, is this really what the circumstances require? Is it the best that I can do at this time? Rabbi Lichtenstein, every single year on Tanit Esther, used to give kimat the same Dvar Torah, and he used to turn to us, who were all in yeshiva studying, and he used to say, you guys are in the palace. You're safe. You're in yeshiva. Your Jewish identity is strong. But what about the people outside? What about the 73% of the Jewish people who are assimilating? Are you doing anything for them? It's lovely, you're learning Torah. What about them? What about the people who don't know anything about their Jewish heritage? What are you going to do? He used to say, you're safe in the palace, but maybe this is your moment. And he used to encourage us into going into Jewish education. And I obviously listened very well to the speech because look what I'm doing. But my point here is, this is a moment where Esther is asked to ask the question, who am I? What am I here for? Right? I was thinking about this in the context of that Billie Eilish song from Barbie movie, right? What was I made for, right? Just won the Oscar, right? And it's actually a beautiful, beautiful song, I've got to say. She's quite a sensitive soul, Billie Eilish, right? And she, what was I made for, right? Is it, will I be happy? I think she asked in that song. And that's a question a lot of young people ask, maybe not enough adults ask, but really that's the question that Mordechai is asking her. Why are you here? Or maybe I'll ask differently. You are here. Now what can you do in this moment? To me, right, that really is a question, like Emily Asfahani Smith says, of purpose. What can your purpose be? And again, I want to stress, meaning is not something which comes out of thin air. Meaning is something we make, something we decide to do. It is not something which is decided for us. We have to pick up the gauntlet. We have to do it. And that's exactly what Mordechai is asking us to do. And here I'm going to come back to a pasuk, which we're going to read in a week's time. And that's Parshat Vayikra. We're about to start Sefer Vayikra. We've got one more week in Shemot, and then we go to Vayikra. And Vayikra begins with this verse, which you see, source number 3. Vayikra el Moshe v'yidaber Hashem elav me'ol mo'ed le'mor. And all the commentaries want to know, right, why is there a double phrase? There's Vayikra, right? Try and highlight this. It's not working. Okay, Vayikra. Come on. Vayikra, and then there's Vayidaber. He called to Moshe and he spoke to him. Usually we have Vayidaber Hashem el Moshe le'mor. That's what we have. We don't have a double phrase. And what's the double? It should say Vayidaber Hashem elav me'ol mo'ed. What's Vayikra Moshe Vayidaber? Here's Rashi. Vayikra Moshe lechol dibrot ulechol amirot ulechol tzivuyim kadma kriya. Whether God said to you, Daber el bnei Israel, or Le'mor, or Tzav et bnei Israel, there was always a previous call. There was always, before Vayidaber or Vayomer or Vayitzav, there was always a Vayikra, a call. He actually says this is Lashon Chiba. It's an expression of love. Lashon Shemalachei Hasharet Mishtamshim Bo. It's the language of the angels, because it says, V'kara ze el ze v'yamar, right? And they call to each other. What is that calling, right? And maybe it's sort of like a wake up, right? A wake you up. And he says, that's a Jewish thing, because, by the way, we have this concept of like preparation. Sof ma'aseh b'machshava tchila, right? In order, you need to prepare, you need to be primed, you need to be, you need the call before the call, right? You need to, sometimes we'll say to somebody, I want to call you, is 7 o'clock a good time, right? Expect the call so that you're ready to speak, right? When's a good time to speak? So that's the Vayikra, and then I'll speak to you. And he says, but to the prophets of the other nations, they had a sense of arai, temporariness, right? And tuma, uncleanliness, casual character, it says here in the English, right? Because as it says to bilam, bilam. In other words, does God take you by surprise? What we're saying is that there's some sense of before the instruction, there is a calling. And Rabbi Sachs, who I, as you know, like quoting, talks about, I was very taken by this passage of Rabbi Sachs because he says, Rabbi Sachs says, Vayikra, Rashi's telling us, means to be called to a task in love. That is the source of one of the key ideas of Western thought, namely the concept of a vocation or a calling. That is your meaning and mission in life. That's what you're placed on earth to do. And he says there are many such calls in Tanakh. Abraham heard Lech Lecha to leave his land, Moshe at the burning bush, right? There was one experienced by Isaiah. But how do we know our calling? And this is where I just love this paragraph. He says, how do I know what to do? And look at this paragraph. Wherever we see a wrong to be righted, a sickness to be healed, a need to be met, and we feel it speaking to us, that's when we come as close as we can in a post-prophetic age to hearing Vayikra, to hearing God's call. What he's asking is us to say is, if it tugs at your heartstrings, if it calls you, then it's God calling you. From the perspective of eternity, we may sometimes be overwhelmed by a sense of our own insignificance, just like Esther was. We're no more than a wave in the ocean, a grain of sand on the seashore, a speck of dust in the surface of infinity. Yet we are here because God wanted us to be, because there's a task He wants us to perform. The search for meaning is the quest for this task. And by the way, Rabbi Sachs says that that's the love. The love is that I can fall into depression because I feel, look, what am I? I'm just a, freak mistake. Says, no, the love is that you can feel as if you're called, as if you matter, and you matter. You can matter, right? Famous story about somebody walking on the seashore and throwing starfish back into the sea. And there are hundreds of starfish on the seashore. And they say, well, how, you're not going to help all the starfish by throwing a few back. And he says, well, it does matter to this one. This one, it matters, right? Each of us is unique, says Rabbi Sachs. Each genetically identical, even genetically identical twins are different. There are things that only we can do. We are what we are in this time, this place, and these circumstances. For each of us, God has a task. You're going to say, well, how do I know that God has a task? The answer is, if you're unique, then you have a unique ability. Work to perform, a kindness to show, a gift to give, love to share, loneliness to ease, pain to heal, or broken lives to help mend. Discerning that task, hearing Vayikra, God's call is one of the great spiritual challenges for each of us. How do we know what it is? And here's the lovely line. What we want to do meets what needs to be done, that is where God wants us to be. That's Rabbi Sachs's definition of finding your meaning. Where what we want to do meets what needs to be done, that is where God wants us to be. It's very powerful. A sense that we matter, a sense that we can matter, a sense that we can have a calling which we choose to do. And by the way, again, this year on Yom Kippur, I had a bit of a incident. I take Yom Kippur very seriously. I take all my davening very seriously. But my dad was staying with me, and my dad at the time was being treated for cancer. Thank God my dad is on the mend, and he's actually received a letter a couple of weeks ago that he's free of any malignancy, so Baruch Hashem. But on Yom Kippur, he was coming to shul for Yiska, and on his way to shul, he collapsed. And I went looking for him to bring him to shul, and I actually found him with about 5 people around him in the street. And they'd called an ambulance, and he'd hit his head, and it was very unpleasant. And in the end, he didn't need the ambulance, and they helped him back into our house. And instead of being in shul for the rest of Yom Kippur, I spent the day at home looking after my dad. Right, my mum was there too, but I wasn't happy leaving the two of them alone. And so I sent my wife off to shul, and it's my dad, so I was looking after him. And I was feeling sore about it, like where I didn't daven Musaf, I didn't go to Ne'ilah. And I said, you know what? This Yom Kippur, this is where I need to be. This is where I need to be. This is where God wants me to be this Yom Kippur, right? There wouldn't be anywhere else that I need to be now. This is me, what I can do in this moment. And instead of regretting that I wasn't there, I understood that that's what I had to do. And I think that's sort of what Rabbi Sachs is saying, that sometimes we have calling in the moment, and we can't always be having that FOMO, we should be there, we should be there. Understand, this is where I need to be now. This is my spiritual, this is my calling. And in this regard, Sandra, you wanna add something?
I quickly scribbled it in the chat. This gave me a little insight into why God first gets the person's attention. He'll say to Abraham, he'll say to Moshe, and then Abraham, he'll call you literally first. I was thinking that maybe that's the beauty of the Ahava. It gives the person, the called person, a chance to respond hineni. It gives you the chance to say, to ready yourself, to take yourself perhaps out of the mundane, to center yourself and say, right, okay, I'm ready to be called. You've got my attention, hineni. And maybe that's why that hineni is intrinsic to the Vayikra.
Right, amazing, amazing. I don't know if, is this a familiar text to you in number 5, the story about the gatekeeper from Kafka?
Crazy, so crazy.
Do you all know it?
Sure. Gatekeeper versus
Sandra knows it.
a man versus gatekeeper. It's very scary.
Yes, very scary. But I'm going to read it. It says before the law sits a gatekeeper. Now the law could be Torah. It could be. It's not clear what the law is, right? But here we go. I'm going to read this. It's from the trial because it's a bit haunting. This, but before the law sits a gatekeeper. To this gatekeeper comes a man from the country who asks to gain entry to the law. But the gatekeeper says he cannot grant him entry at this moment. The man thinks about it and then asks if he'll be allowed to come in later. He says it's possible, but not now. At the moment, the gate to the law stands open as always, and the gatekeeper walks to the side, so the man bends over in order to see through the gate into the inside. And the gatekeeper notices and he laughs and says, if it tempts you so much, try, in spite of my prohibition, but take note, I'm powerful. And I'm the only most lowly gatekeeper, but from room to room stand gatekeepers even more powerful than the other. I can't endure even one glimpse of the third. The man of the country has not expected such difficulties. The law should always be accessible for everyone, he thinks. But as he now looks more closely to the gatekeeper in his fur coat, his large pointed nose, and his long thin back Tartar's beard, he decides it'd be better to wait until he gets permission to go inside. The gatekeeper gives him a stool and has him sit down at the side of the front of the gate. And he sits for days and years, and he makes many attempts to be let in, and he wears the gatekeeper out with his quest. And the gatekeeper often interrogates him briefly, questioning him about his homeland and many other things. But they're indifferent questions, the kind great men put, and at the end, he always tells him that he cannot let him inside. And the man has equipped himself with many things through his journey, spends everything, no matter how valuable, to win over the gatekeeper. The latter takes it all, but as he does so, he says, I'm only taking this so you may not think that you've failed to do anything. During the many years the man observes the gatekeeper almost continuously, he forgets the other gatekeepers, and this one seems to him the only obstacle for entry to the law. He curses the unlucky circumstance. In the first year, thoughtlessly, and out loud later as he grows old, he still mumbles to himself, becomes childish, and since in the long years studying the gatekeeper, he's come to know the fleas in his fur collar, even asks the fleas to help him persuade the gatekeeper. Finally, his eyesight grows weak, and he doesn't know whether things are really darker around him or whether the eyes are merely deceiving him, but he recognizes now in the darkness an illumination which breaks inextinguishably out of the gateway to the law, and now he no longer has much time to live. Before his death, he gathers in his head all his experiences of the entire time up to one question, which is not yet put to the gatekeeper, and he waves to him and says, since he can no longer lift up his stiffening body, and the gatekeeper has to bend all the way down, the great difference has changed things to the disadvantage of the man. What do you still want to know then? Asks the gatekeeper. You're insatiable. And the man says, everyone strives after the law. How is it that in many years, no one except me has requested entry? The gatekeeper sees the man is already dying, and in order to reach his diminishing sense of hearing, he shouts at him, here, no one else can gain entry, since this entrance was assigned only to you. And now I'm going to close it. It's a terrifying story because the story is really about how we all have a task in life, and we look at certain things as insurmountable obstacles, and we think we can't overcome them. And we're worried that if we overcome this, then there'll be something else, and there's something else. But ultimately, the law, which is, I guess, the good for Kafka, like Torah, like goodness, like meaning, is something we all seek. But often we're too afraid to do what it needs to be done because it is scary. It's very scary, right, to confront it. But he says this gate, he says, where's everybody else? And the answer is they've each got their own gate. This was your gate, which means, of course, that you could have done it. You could have done it. It was here for you, right? You stood your life waiting, right? Waiting for the good moment, wait for the opportune moment, but you've got to make that moment. You've got to somehow do it. Okay, it's a bit Kafkaesque, so of course it's very depressing and all that stuff. But it comes back to the central point, which is, can we somehow try and carve out the meaning which is going to be there for somebody with our unique talents, with our unique abilities? Who knows? Right? Who knows whether this is the moment for which you came to your royal position, right? Who knows whether you're hearing this call now is actually God calling out to you to ask you to live out your life mission. And I know what I'm saying is very hard, but I do believe that when people are looking for meaning, right, then that's what they're looking for. And a lot of times we're expecting it to be served up to us with ease. And what I think Kafka's trying to say is that sometimes it's hard work. It's hard work. But if we set ourselves to the task, we can actually do it. So I want to move on to something else, which might take us into another stage. And I'm thinking to myself about questions of what gives us meaning in life. And we've spoken about a lot of them, but I want to deal with maybe something which can also hinder meaning. And that is that sometimes we really just feel empty. We feel we hit a wall. We feel we have a hard day, or, things really come out of focus. And what do we do? And I called this bit Rav Kook ups and downs, but I realize now that I should have really called it downs and ups. And Rav Kook says the following, and this is from, I should say, this is from something called Shmoneh Kvatzim. These were Rav Kook's notebooks. They found 8 notebooks of his writings where he used to use, literally he was journaling. He would, at any point in the day, would just spin out a paragraph, right? Whenever he was thinking about it, and would write something down. And these are some of his thoughts. So here we go. Kuf Samach Dalet, number 1. I'm sorry, I don't have a translation for this. When a person feels absolutely wasted, absolutely empty, you feel like you're nothing. And your soul feels like it is bending over inside you, with the low sense of your self-worth. Maybe like that man outside the gate. He says, Yeda, he should know, Ki Yeshuat Hashem krova laha'ir lo. He should know that God's salvation is going to be able to be enlightened for him. If you're feeling rock bottom, then know one thing. It can only get better. He says, if we have the phrase that pride comes before a fall, right? We have that phrase in English, right? Pride comes before a fall, right? So hide before you fall. So he says, well, then the opposite is true as well. If pride comes before a fall, then after a fall comes great light. Lifnei gedula, before greatness, v'ora, and light comes dakut ruach, comes a depressed spirit, v'anva pnimit, and a sense of humility. Umiyad, and immediately, a person should take all of their faculties, levases midat anavazu, to learn from this moment of lowliness, to take this humility, with all of your spiritual resources. You're a man, and you should raise yourself. Use your inner soul, your pure inner soul, to raise yourself. with the source of peace. Maybe peace means like wholeness and trying to reach the Or Melech Giyut Lavesh El Chei HaOlamim, return back to God. I'll read the next paragraph as well. It's slightly different. But Adam if a person feels very like they have broken a lot in the spiritual realm, they should know that now is the time to build a new building. Higher, even higher, and more substantial. I say this often to my students. My students, I learn with students a lot on a gap year, and they come from, Jewish day schools. They come to Israel for a year. They have wonderful experiences, and then they're going off to university. And I say to all of them, I said, there's going to come a day when suddenly in your second year of university, in your third year of university, things are going to go out of focus. You're going to learn all sorts of new things. You're going to encounter a whole new set of values, and you're going to say to yourself, you know what, everything I grew up with doesn't feel relevant, doesn't feel like it's speaking to me. And I say to them, don't be panicked in that moment. It's very natural, because until now, your Judaism has been for your time at home, in time in school, for your time in Israel. In university, you're going to become a different person. You're going to shape yourself socially. You're going to learn new stuff. And frankly, just like, when you were growing, your clothes which you wore when you were 8 don't fit you when you're 10. Clothes which you wear when you're 12 don't fit you when you're 15, right? Your Judaism is, your life is growing, your maturity is growing, and therefore it's natural that your Judaism won't fit. And what you have to do is somehow, get a new pair of clothes. You have to cut those clothes apart and build a new outfit, right? So that it will fit you, right? I'll read it again. Number 2, when you feel like your spirituality is shattered, you should know that the time has come to build a new building higher, right? More substantial. More than it was before. And you should, really try and work on yourself, in a systematic way, but with a sense of courage and bravery, with true spiritual purity, with a spirit of courage, and a sense of joy. I'm growing. Things are hard, but I'm encountering new things. Because God is good and right, and therefore even if you've made mistakes, He'll guide you on your way. He will show His way to those who are humble. What I want to say is, I don't want you to think from anything I've said, and that's why I guess I brought Kafka and Rav Kook. They're both quite sobering. What they're saying is it ain't easy. And sometimes there are lots of ups and downs, or maybe I should say downs and ups. Rav Kook promises us that really when we have a down, it's, yes, indeed, something's broken, but it's really broken because the spiritual constellation, when somebody says to me sometimes, one of my students will say, I don't know if I believe in God. I ask them, what God? I said, maybe the problem isn't that you don't believe in God. Maybe you just, the definition that you have of God isn't matching you, right? Isn't fitting you well enough, right? Maybe it's your 5-year-old God or your 12-year-old God, right? Maybe we need to study more about God, and maybe you'll find that God's bigger than you thought He was, right? So once again, this notion of feeling lowly means that you need to somehow reconstruct things, right? This happens, by the way, with all sorts of relationships. It might happen with a relationship with a boss at work. It might happen a relationship with a spouse or with a child. That sometimes things go wrong and you hit a rocky stretch. And what you actually need to do is pay more attention and think about what's wrong and think about how to rebuild. What he says is, if you've hit a rocky stretch, right, it's much better to have a problem than to ignore a problem. If somebody's not speaking to you, if you have an argument, then you've hit a pressure point. Great, and that's a point whereby you can actually fix things, because you can figure out what went wrong. So I think that's something really significant. And the last point I want to say about meaning, which Emily S. So this was really what Emily Esfahani Smith didn't necessarily talk about, was how it's sometimes really hard. It's hard to find meaning. And sometimes we have moments where we phase out of meaning. And we have to realize that that's by the nature of things, and that's okay. But what Rav Kook is promising us is that after we have a rocky patch, it can be a launching pad for a time which is better. And maybe that's a hope that we can all hold on to. And the last point that I want to talk a little bit about is environment.
Before you do, just one comment I want to bring in from the chat from Stacy Lehman that I'm not sure you addressed. Is the second Rav Kook where Tamar Ross comes up with the title of Expanding the Palace of Torah?
That's actually an explicit, that's actually a very explicit quote of Rav Kook. You build the palace of Torah over, but it's the same Rav Kook, but I think it's a different quote. I think it's a different quote. But it's the same concept that when something's broken, we have to build the palace of Torah above it. I want to talk a little bit about the power of groups and environment, which I think is very relevant. I love this Mishnah in Pirkei Avot. Amar Rav Yossi ben Kisma pam echad hayiti ma'alech baderech u'paga bi adam echad v'natan li shalom ve'echsarti lo shalom. Once I was walking along the road, says Rav Yossi ben Kisma. I don't know much about Rav Yossi ben Kisma, but he says, I met a man, and he said hello, and I responded. And he said, Rebbi, me'ezeh makom ata? You're a rabbi. Where are you from? And he said, Amarti, me'ir gedola shel chachamim v'shel sofrim ani. I'm from a town with lots of scholars and lots of rabbis. Amarti lo Rebbi ritzoncha shetador imanu bimkomenu. We need a rabbi. Come to live with us. Right? Obviously, there's a surplus where you are. Come share the goods with us. So I'm going to reward you with great riches. Amarti lo, I said to him, you can give me all the riches in the world, but any dar ela b'makom Torah. I only want to live in a place of Torah. I prefer the Torah of your mouth than thousands of silver and gold. Right? This idea that I think the idea being that our environment really affects us. Our environment, sometimes things fall out of meaning, right? Because the people around us are very dissonant from that value. And sometimes I know we all say we need to surround ourselves with people different than ourselves to open us up. But sometimes we also need to be surrounded by people who are like ourselves and people who share our values. It's very hard to be in an environment which is contrary to so many things that we believe in and value. And this is the story about Rabbi Elazar ben Arach. I'll read it since we only have a couple of minutes. I'll read it in on the one hand, Elazar ben Arach was a student of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai called him an ever producing spring. He was the most creative of the rabbis. I'll give you an example. An incident involving Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai and his student, Rabbi Elazar ben Arach. Rabbi Elazar said to my teacher, teach me a chapter in the divine chariot, right? Marsemer Kava, which is all about the secrets of the divine. Rabbi Elazar said to him, my teacher, allow me to say before you one thing, and Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai wouldn't teach him because he said, you're not allowed to teach this stuff. So Rabbi Elazar said to him, allow me to say you one thing you taught me. And I'm reading in the bolded bits. He said to him, speak. Immediately, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai alighted from the donkey and wrapped his head in his cloak in a manner of reverence and sat on the stone under the olive tree. And Rabbi Elazar said to him, my teacher, for what reason did you alight from the donkey? And he said, how can we talk about the divine chariot and when the divine presence is with us and the ministering angels accompanying us that I should ride on a donkey? And immediately Rabbi Elazar ben Arach began to discuss the Masemer Kavah, the chariot, and fire descended from heaven and encircled all the trees, and all the trees began singing. We have this image of Rabbi Elazar ben Arach, the most supreme amongst the sages. However, right, we read later on in Kohelet Rabbah, Rabbi Yochanan had 5 disciples, and as long as he lived, they sat before him. But when he died, they went to Yavne. But Rabbi Elazar ben Arach joined his wife at a place called Diyumset, a place of good water and beautiful scenery. In other words, they went to live in an oasis. He waited for them to come, but they didn't. And when they didn't come, he wanted to go to them, and his wife said, they need you, you don't need them. He said, in a case of food and container and mice, does the food go to the mice, or does the mice go to the food? He listened to her until he forgot all his learning. In other words, the greatest of the sages needed a community to keep him sharp. The greatest of the sages needed a chavruta. He needed like-minded people in order to keep him on the basis that he was. So what I wanted to say when we're talking about meaning is that meaning is something we all need. We've got the 4 principles of Emily Esfahani Smith, the notion of belonging, purpose, transcendence, and the notion of storytelling. What I wanted to add here is the idea that what we've spoken today is the notion of really experiencing a calling, realizing that belonging is a sense of identification and having a sense of people around you, and realizing that it's tough. It's tough. We all have our downs. We can also have our ups. I guess on that optimistic note, we're going to end the course here. And I hope this has given you room to be a little pensive and to think a little inwards, be a little mindful. And please God, we should all meet again in learning. And delighted to be with you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Rabbi Alex Israel, for these 7 weeks of good teaching. Thank you, everyone for coming back. Rabbi Israel, if people have questions, is there a way they can contact you?
They can certainly email me. Hold on. That's my email. So people can contact me there.
All right, that's posted in chat. Thank you.
If I can make a comment on Kafka. In the throes of his personal crises and the swirl of his intellect, he had, before his death, his untimely death, commenced to learn Hebrew, and he had fantasized, really not a fantasy, about moving to Israel.
Wow.
And to perhaps opening a restaurant, believe it or not. That somehow this was the actualization and the resolution of his different conflicts.
Wow. Didn't know that.
There's actually records among whatever was left of him doing exercises learning Hebrew.
Wow. Never heard of that. That's great. Thank you. Thank you, Justin.
All right.
Okay, I have to run, so please excuse me. And Lihitraot.
Lihitraot. And if you want to keep learning with Risha, that's great. We have a class coming up this next week on Thursday, March 21st, after the fast ends on the East Coast at 8:30 p.m. with Rabbi David Silber on the topic of, for such a time as this, reflections on Purim after October 7th. And I am going to post the link for that in the chat. Thank you, everyone, for joining on this course. As I've mentioned previously, the recordings are up on Facebook video and will be on YouTube within a few weeks.